Thanks everybody for coming. Pretty good turnout. Good evening. Thanks again for showing up tonight. I'm Poinsette. I'm the Executive Director of the Takshanuk Watershed Council. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge our two local sovereign tribal governments, Chilkat Indian Association here in Deschutes and Haines, and Chilkat Indian Village in Klukwan. Here's our lineup of speakers tonight. Just a little bit about myself before we get started here. I've lived here up near Mosquito Lake for about 15 years. I've worked at Takshanuk Watershed Council for about 6. Before that, I was a general contractor, mostly building houses. Mostly building houses, and I also work quite a bit as a seasonal wildlife biologist, including 2 years as a biologist with Yellowstone National Park Bison, which was a really great experience. In college, I studied electrical engineering, and then I came to Alaska and hitchhiked around the state and went back and switched my major to fish and wildlife ecology. This is the general agenda tonight. I'm going to do a quick little introduction, just 5 or 10 minutes about the ecology of the Chilkat watershed. And then Lani, Hotch, and Hotch are going to follow me. And then some presentations on some new research by Guy Archibald and Hawk Inlet. And then I'd ask that everybody jot down their questions or type them into your phone and save them for the end. We'll get everybody back up here and try to answer those questions. And then finally, hopefully we'll have some closing remarks from Vice President Hotch. So in these types of public discussions about issues like mining, we're always talking about stakeholders, engaging and including all stakeholders. Look out there, looks like we've got a good cross-section here. So before we start talking about mining and tailing storage and perpetual water treatment and all of that, I just kind of wanted to talk about the Chilkat River itself, which is a stakeholder in this process. All watersheds are valuable, and Southeast Alaska is blessed with an abundance of pretty special ones. The Taku, the Stikine, the Unuk, the Alsek. But even among those neighbors, the Chilkat really does stand out for its plant and animal abundance, its fisheries, its biodiversity, and also perhaps its resilience to climate change. This is the confluence of the Chilkat, Lani, and Cirque rivers. You can just see Klukwan there, kind of in the right center of the picture. This is a particularly rich part of the watershed, both biologically and culturally. So the Chilkat, and it's surprising to me sometimes that those of us that live here sometimes don't even realize these things about how special this place is. It's the most biologically diverse region in all of Alaska. It has the highest number of plant species, as well as some unique plant communities. The birch lodgepole pine forest that we have here is found nowhere else in Southeast, and it points to the unique geography of this place, where relatively low and ice-free mountain passes connect coastal maritime ecoregions with the interior boreal ecoregion. The Chilkat watershed sits right on the boundary of these two very different ecosystems and climates. This, combined with other favorable hydrologic and geologic conditions, have created an environment that supports both an abundance and a diversity of fish and wildlife habitats. This is a shot looking up the Haines Highway across the Canadian border, the upper Lani there. And so you can see that a pass like this in this region is relatively rare, where you can walk up and over the top of the mountains and down to the other side and only be out of the trees for a short time. This connectivity has allowed both plants and animals to move easily between the coast and the interior. Because of the connectivity with the interior provided by these Chilkat mountain passes, the Chilkat watershed has the highest mammal diversity in Alaska, with 38 species reported here so far. We have both brown bears and black bears, which are both common, and up in the mountains not far away are interior type grizzlies. Moose are abundant here, which is rare in Southeast Alaska. And we're starting to get black-tailed deer moving up from the south. And I've even seen mule deer at 25 miles. Lynx can be abundant when they are at their peak of their 11-year cycle, and mountain lions have been spotted here also. All 5 species of Pacific salmon are abundant, as well as cutthroat, steelhead, and Dolly Varden. In addition to this abundance of salmonas, the Chilkat, Chilkoot, and other local rivers also support one of the last really healthy and reliable runs of hooligan on the west coast. Some of you got out there today and saw the hooligan. Both rivers, lots in the Chilkoot this year, which is good. We've had some poor runs in the Chilkoot lately, but it seems to be going this year. It's not known what is happening with the hooligan from California to Alaska, but they seem to be struggling almost everywhere, and we hope that we continue to be the exception. Despite a 75% reduction in salmon output over the last century, the Chilkat still remains Southeast Alaska's top producer of both sockeye and chum, and is a very close neck-and-neck race for the #1 coho spot with the taku. Our late fall and early winter runs of fish also attract one of the largest gatherings of bald eagles in the world. This is the upper Chilkat River, downstream from the rock a little bit. Looking downstream at the confluence with the Kelsall there in the distance. Much of the river valley looks like this, which is just spectacular salmon habitat. I rode a snow machine up here once in December, and there were cohos spawning in those ponds in the distance there at the base of the hill. Even if you don't fish, salmon still affect every aspect of life in the Chilkat Valley. Commercial fishing represents 15% of local incomes. Fish and our clean water and healthy fish habitats, the eagles, the bears, all of that attracts thousands of tourists, which is by far the largest single economic sector. Salmon are the foundation of the human economy and culture here, and they have been for thousands of years. And not coincidentally, they are also the basis of the entire ecosystem. There is nothing more valuable in the Chilkat watershed than our salmon. So the Chilkat watershed is extremely valuable for its production of salmon, it's valuable for its biodiversity, it's valuable for its uniqueness of its plant communities. All of these factors contribute to its economic value to us, to its ecological resilience, its potential value as climate refugia for fish and other animals. We have a responsibility to care for these values and conserve them for the future. So now, we've just been through a century of taking from this landscape with very little giving back. So now I think we have this fantastic opportunity here in the Chilkat Valley to live and work in this place while we maintain and restore ecosystems to full functionality and build a sustainable and regenerative economy that's based on truly renewable resources like salmon. Thank you. So next up is Lani Hotch. Lani is a resident of Pluckwan, CID tribal member, nationally recognized textile artist, and a tribally proclaimed culture bearer since 2017.
Acknowledging the Chilkoot and the Chilkat tribes here, and I wanted to sing the Tlingit national anthem because it kind of ties in with what I want to talk about. But the words to the song is actually a song of survival, much like the Star Spangled Banner is a song of survival. And in the song, the words are, "Our voices will still be heard on our grandfather's land." Just saying that gives me goosebumps. Our voices will still be heard on our grandfather's land. And then the second verse is to pray for your raven. Well, Jones is my raven. and you know, that's the secret to survival. Praying. It works wonders. So if you would all stand while we sing this. acknowledge the Chilkoot and the Chilkat people, and we were actually all once one people here, and so don't get too caught up on this. You know, the federal government came in and created. They had this Indian Reorganization Act, and they created these boilerplate constitutions, and that's how we became separate people, but we were actually all one people. So this is our land extended from Berners Bay, which is about 18 miles past the Canadian border station, down to Berners Bay, the north side of Berners Bay. And went from mountaintop to the Takshanuk, there's Alaska Range, and the Chilkat Range all the way down there. So that's a pretty good area of land, 2.6 million acres at least on the American side. Oops. When we had our groundbreaking ceremony for the Heritage Center in Club one of the elders used these words, Anyat Kusani, and he was addressing the crowd. And I learned that phrase means honorable people of the land. Honorable people of the land. And I've been thinking about that. What does it mean to honor? Or when somebody gets an honor. And are we honorable? Am I honorable? Do I behave in an honorable way? I looked up, what does it mean to honor? In the dictionary it says, like, to give respect or, another word for honor, to give respect, to show appreciation for. And then it's like also to do the right thing, to adhere to a moral standard. Okay. High respect, great esteem, adherence to what is right, or a moral obligation. And I didn't formally introduce myself, although Derek did. Hotch, you cut this out. I'm gonna get kind of. My favorite name is Hotch. It means ancient threads, which is appropriate because I'm a weaver, and named after my great-great-grandmother, who lived and died here. And I put this picture up because I was born in Club-One. I've lived most of my life there. My ancestors are buried there. We raised our children there. And, I wake up in the morning, I'll hear the birds, and I can hear the river. I like to leave my window cracked open sometimes just so I can hear the river. And then in the fall when the eagles come, and I could hear them on the river. And it just resonates with my soul. I'm not trying to add a bunch of fluff. I'm being honest as to who I am and what the Chilkat watershed means to me as a person. I feel very connected to this place, this Chilkat Valley, because I've lived here and I feed off of that river. And my soul feeds off of that river. It's so much a part of who I am. And when you introduce yourself or you just meet somebody, what's the first thing you ask them? Besides, what's your name? Where are you from? Why do we ask that? Because where you live imprints your personality. It makes an indelible mark on who you are as a person. And so this Chilkat watershed has imprinted your personality. Every single one of us here has benefited from the river, from this environment. who you are as well. Okay. Oh, I told you I was born 1956, and that's my family in the top left. When I was just a baby, that's me in my mother's lap, new baby. And then 2017, we had a group full. It was my brother, oldest brother Ralph, his birthday. He just turned 80 on the left there in the blue shirt. And then that's me on the far right. And there's a couple missing, my sister Kimberly and our brother Dave, and our brother Fred also has already passed on at that point. But from that to that, and we're still here. And then our older ancestors, this is with the Chilkat blanket, that's my great-grandmother, Mary Willard. Her blanket name was Slack. And maybe you've seen that brown bear blanket around. Oh, I think they have that. Not that one, similar one at the Haines Lefkening Yards. And then my in the bottom right there, my mom on the left, my brother Jack, and then my grandmother Jenny Warren and Mary Willard at older age. You know, that's her young and that's her in her later years. Then my uncle Albert. I was just telling somebody earlier about how I like to listen to the Biltmore radio station. A friend Nanny was telling me about going there, because my Uncle Albert used to like to listen to 40s music while he was hanging his net, and he'd blast it. And I lived right across the street, so I started liking that. And now every time we work on salmon, we're jarring fish in our kitchen, we play Uncle Albert music. So, show you my human relatives. I have a friend, her name is Lori Puyer, she's Lakota, and they have an expression in the Lakota language, and I can't say it for you, but it means this: all my relations. All my relations. And they're not just talking about people, they're talking about the eagles, the swans, the salmon, got my picture, the bear, you know, even the trees. Lately I've been learning about herbal remedies, and I'm starting to feel more connection to the plants. And I've always had this sense when I'm walking among the cottonwoods, like their grandfather's spirits or something. Like I just feel this benevolence from them, you know, in the same way that, you know, you can't do any wrong in your grandparents' eyes, how they just love you unconditionally, no matter what you do, they love you. Well, I just feel that when I'm walking among the cottonwoods. So I think of them as my relatives too, all my relations. We have this proverb, I learned this from Joe Hotch. You know, we all knew and loved Joe Hotch. He just recently passed. And I was sitting in on a Tlingit language mentor, apprentice workshop. And he shared this proverb, "Hachasegu chanu ha'archaye." Our life is close by our food. And I spent some time thinking about that, how it is for me, my own life. And you know that saying, you are what you eat. Well, that's true, but nowadays it's not so much just what you eat, but what the food industry has done to what you eat. And you know, there's a lot of food additives, excitotoxins, so that you'll want to eat more of it. Hormones, antibiotics, all that stuff, and it's making our people sick. There's a lot of, you know, diabetes, food sovereignty. It's a good thing to know where your food comes from. I love it that I can get wild salmon from the Chilkat River and know that it's safe to eat. It's not farmed. It's not been given who knows what before I eat it. And so this picture, this is my last one. It shows the abundance that we have. I think Derek painted a pretty good picture of what a treasure we have here. I appreciate that, and I realize that too. The abundance of all the things that we have in the Chilkat Valley. That's my brother Fred holding up a big king salmon. My grandma would have said queen salmon. And blueberries and seaweed, red ribbon seaweed. Some people call it dulse. Different kinds of berries. Oh, I just love it. Blueberries and elderberries and cranberries and silkberries. Oh, all kinds of berries. And even gardening, again on the bottom left. All these things in our life, it kind of revolves around the seasons. What's available? You know, springtime we get the seaweed, we get the hooligan. Summertime we're working on the sand and tending the garden. And in the fall time we start getting the berries and then moose or other game. A mountain goat if you're really lucky. Well, I saw a mountain goat like 30 feet from the road the other day, from the highway. It was down really close. So, I'm saying all this, I'm telling you all this, what the Chilkat River means to me, and why I feel in the pit of my stomach that we have to protect it. We have to preserve it. We have to do all we can to keep its integrity. There's not many places left for the wild salmon. And it behooves us as people, honorable people of the land, to protect it. And I encourage you and I request, I beg you all to do all you can to save our river. And Chish.
Thank you, Lani. Inspiring words. Next we have Hotch, Vice President of Chilkat Indian Village Tribal Council. That's the junior, Jones P. Hotch Jr.
Or you can shut that.
Can you hear me? Yes. A little bit louder. Okay. Lani just thrilled me calling me on her raven. Yesterday I saw something on TV. His hair is the color that mine's going to. He had a big heart tattooed on his shoulder arm, and the words on it was Vicky's property. I'm Santatz's property. I'd like to recognize Haines Assembly member. I believe I saw Mrs. Stickler here. Auntie. And Chish. This year we had the privilege and honor of addressing the Haines Borough Assembly on the matter. Honorable Mayor kept referring to us something like we're neighbors. And I'd like to build upon that. In 2004, there was some elders that met, and they came up with Southeast traditional tribal values, our way of life. The first one, discipline and obedience to the traditions of our ancestors. Next, respect for self, elders, and others. Respect for nature and property. Everybody's favorite. Patience. Pride in family, clan, and traditions is found in love, loyalty, and generosity. Be strong in mind, body, and spirit. They came up with this humor. And our late tribal elder, Joe Hotch, he always said, we always need to include humor. You know, I see some wisdom in that. If I went around totally serious 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I wouldn't be here too long. Another one, hold each other up. Listen well and with respect. Speak with care. My father, Jones Hotch Sr., his brother, the late Joe Hotch, was getting up to speak at a Kuwait. He said, Jones doesn't say much, but when he does, you better listen. My father stopped him and told him in Tlingit, don't say too much. You might cost us money. But that's how it used to be. If we got up and spoke in public like this and insulted someone, we paid for that, for doing that. And this is what I like here. I'm standing up speaking, I'm standing on and standing for the words I am speaking. We are stewards of the air, land, and sea. Reverence for our Creator. Live in peace and harmony. Be strong. Have courage. I am proposing an idea to all, and I hope you could all pass the word to others. On what Lani's, how she started, that's kind of what I'd like to see. Everybody in the Chilkat Valley start something like that. We come together like this and somebody stand up and say, my name is this, my heritage is this, my father is this, my mother, and where I'm from. We are neighbors, and I'd like to move the needle, and I believe we could have a path to these, and also to understanding each and every one of us. We can understand each other better. There's something here Lani was talking about. We are a traditional subsistence lifestyle village. We've always been. And the new word, Lani said, food sovereignty. We are seasonal harvesting. And I shared earlier tonight with a gentleman, the hooligans are here. I said, now we can start our calendar. The hooligans are here. That brings such an excitement to us. And then we'll be waiting for that first pot of boiled fish. There's something I'd like to share. This is from the internet, so. How Alaska got its name, it's from the Elliott word. And I'm not even gonna try. It refers to an object to which the sea is directed, in this case, the Alaska Peninsula and the mainland. This is sometimes loosely translated Great Land. And the name Alaska, it went through about 3 or 4 different names before it finally settled on Alaska. The Alaska state fish is keen salmon. Alaska state animal is moose. This legislature passed what is now more familiar known as the Chilkat Bald Eagle Preserve. And the purpose is to establish a state-owned land and water described as the Alaska Chilkat Bald Eagle Preserve as part of the state park system. The primary purpose for establishing the Alaska Chilkat Bald Eagle Preserve is to protect and perpetuate the Chilkat bald eagles and their essential habitats within the Alaska Chilkat Bald Eagle Preserve, in recognition of their statewide, nationally, and internationally significant values in perpetuity. The Alaska State Legislature passed this. The Alaska Bald Eagle Preserve is also established to, 1, protect and sustain the natural salmon spawning and rearing areas of the Chilkat River and the Chilkoot River systems within the preserve in perpetuity. Here's the United States Congress. The bald eagle was officially adopted as the emblem of the United States 5 years later in 1785. The bald eagle was chosen because of its association with authority and statehood. In fact, the eagle has been used as a symbol of government power since Roman times. That's the state in the United States. And here's where we are. We are raven, or we are eagle. My wife is an eagle from the wolf house, and so are our children. And for salmon in our culture, we have sockeye clan people, coho clan people, dog salmon people. This is how we are so very connected to salmon, as my wife Lani has been explaining. And in the Chilkat Indian Village Constitution, I believe it's 3L, to protect the natural environment and resources of the village. ladies and gentlemen, I really believe that if we can start having gatherings like this and everyone share where they're from and their family heritage, I'd like us to move from neighbors to friends. We are in this valley. We chose to live here. Why cannot we become friends? What's standing in the way? I'd like to hear it. I'm offering this to you, everyone. There's because I believe everyone here is, you are a part of what truly makes the Chilkat Valley unique. Take that to the bank. That is what I totally believe. And I'm speaking to the Haines people. Need to tip my hat, my heart. 2 of the 3 new inductees into the Gold Medal Hall of Fame. I believe that is as high as you can go in Southeast Pasco. They were 2 Haines High alumni members. Jesse McGraw, Andrew Frisky. That is quite an accomplishment. The Valley, I believe, is very proud of them. And the Haines girls and boys this past year. You all know what the girls did. Just because we're not there, I know I'm still cheering for you guys. Yeah. I am totally honest and mean every word. I'd like us to start moving the needle and to start becoming friends. And I want to share a story an elder told us one time. These were the 2 best friends. There was a joint A&B and A&S Camp 8 meeting going on. And I don't know what was on the agenda, but one was on one side and one was on the other. The elder said they went at it. They literally went at it so much that she was wondering if they were ever going to be friends again. That motion was voted on, and the meeting was adjourned. And so was this, because they had their say on the motion. When the meeting is adjourned, it should stop there. And I am working on that for me. See, so too many times now I hear, I want to say this, I want to say that. You can say it at the meeting. And I feel that that is why there's some division or something, mistrust. I was in several important decisions that had to be made. One, I made up my mind 100%. I will abide by what they want. 100%. But I made sure I would do this. I will say what I want to say. And I did till I could barely speak. And I was satisfied for what the decision came out. That's what I stood for. Buenos dias. Buenos dias.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next up, we have Chris Zimmer. Chris works for Rivers Without Borders down in Juneau, where he's lived for 20 years. I'm not sure exactly how many. 23 years. This is also a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, so nobody talk about it.
Such a good year for sporting events in Pittsburgh this year. Of course, Steelers and Penguins are kind of falling apart. Okay, Derek, what do I push? Okay. Again, I'm Chris Zimmer with Rivers Without Borders. Been working on mining and salmon issues probably for about 23 years since I moved up here to Juneau. We had wanted to make this presentation a couple years ago, but COVID got in the way of that. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for coming here. This might not be as inspiring as Jones and Lani, but I want to talk about the preliminary economic assessment, PEA, for the Palmer project that was distributed back in 2019. There was an amended version put out a couple years ago, but it didn't amend anything substantively. So the effective date of these two studies is 2019. And what I want to do is give a quick background on the technical economic studies, because what I see is I don't think there's a lot of general knowledge about what these studies are, what they can tell you, what they can't tell you. There's essentially three studies that go on with the mine. And there's the PEA, which we have now, very general, not based on a lot of information, a very preliminary scoping study. Then you go to a pre-feasibility study, and then you go to a feasibility study. Each of them get more certain, each of them get more detailed, and the feasibility study is what you take to investors, is what you take to the bank and say, now we're looking for 10s or 20s, 30s, $50 million. The PEA and the pre-feasibility study are not something you would take to the bank. So the PEA, again referred to as a scoping study, includes an economic analysis of the potential viability, and it's at a very early stage in the project. One of the problems with PEAs is they may contain results based on inferred mineral resources, which are the lowest certainty. They're not based on a large amount of drilling and sampling, and they're usually based on very cursory samples. The pre-feasibility study gets more certain, more precise, more detailed info, has more factors that might affect the mine, such as community issues, permit challenges, accuracy of about 20 to 30%, and then when you get up to the feasibility study, you're looking at 10 to 15%, and the feasibility study is a comprehensive study that includes everything, geological, engineering, legal, as you see up there, and this is what serves as the basis for a final decision by a financial institution or investor to invest in the project. And we're several years away from this for the Palmer project at least. This was one of the things that convinced me that there was a real misunderstanding of the PEAs out there. This is a quote attributed to someone from the Mental Health Trust that said, technical feasibility study proved that somebody would make a lot of money off this. People can get loans, ready to invest big time, because a feasibility study says that everything was looked at and is going to work. Wrong, 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 and wrong. This was not a bankable feasibility study. It does not prove anyone will make money by definition, by the law. By law, these things cannot be used for this, and they, again, the PIA is the most uncertain of the different studies. There has been no big-time investment so far. It wasn't a feasibility study, and it clearly did not say or even prove that everything's going to work. So we wanted to commission a review of this, and we went to a gentleman named Jim Kuipers, who is a consultant out of Montana. He has worked for 35 years in the mining industry. He's run mines, he's operated them, he's worked for major companies analyzing feasibility studies. He's a registered professional engineer, qualified expert witness, and has conducted numerous reviews of documents like this. He has actually worked to make several mines actually better, more viable, and operable that are now operating. The summary, the project viability, very speculative with a high level of inherent risk. And I'm going to talk about the specific types of risk. The deposit, mineral reserve or mineral resources versus reserves, very uncertain versus much more certain. This plan to export, or actually export the barite is highly speculative with really no documentation that'll work. The project's definitely susceptible, as most mines are, to future metal demands and prices. And the capital, operating, and environmental costs are likely underestimated, which we've seen in PEAs across the board. So project viability, again, not to beat on this too much, but inferred mineral resources, and this is the fine print legal language they have to put in there, are considered too speculative geologically to have economic considerations applied to them. The project is not going to have economic viability until these mineral resources are converted to mineral reserves. And that's going to require a lot more sampling and drilling and analysis. Therefore, the PEA should not be utilized as an actual basis for future mine plans. It's just way too uncertain. Again, Kuiper's conclusion was very speculative with a high level of risk. Again, the PIA, by definition, does not demonstrate that the project is economically viable. And we see this in general. The PEAs are usually very optimistic. You know, the mining company's not going to get investment if it puts out a PIA and says our project is crap. And the consultants that write these PEAs are not going to get any business if they put out a plan or if they put out a proposal that says, you know, this is very risky and uncertain. So there's a high level of optimism here. It's best case, not anywhere near worst case. And there's been no actual metallurgical testing of the AG zone deposit. And you're not going to be able to tell what's down there until you do more drilling and do the actual test work. The barite plan, this is an odd one. The Palmer representatives have stated that this is a novel plan. I would quibble with that. It's highly speculative, and there's very little support for their contention that the barite is marketable. Key implication here is without barite, the internal rate of return, which is a measure of the economic return of the project, post-tax and pre-tax 14 and 18%. Most analysts and investors consider 20% to be the minimum benchmark. So my kind of guess is they put this barite thing in here to pencil whip the numbers so they could get that IRR over 20. If you include the barite, it pops up over 20 to about 24. There's also the issue about the grade. There's no evidence supporting the conclusion that the barite from this mine could be marketed just, or would be equivalent to the high-grade primary barite resources that are now used. Barite is largely used in drilling mine. It's a component of that. Also the cost. The PIA predicts a future price of $220 a ton, and we can find no justification for that in the PEA or in the general literature. And if the demand for barite goes up, there are more larger, better placed sources. I think Palmer has maybe a year's worth of barite for the U.S., whereas there are many more larger sources in the U.S. that could be developed. Nobody else is doing this. No mine like this has tried to sell their barite, including Greens Creek. The other implication of the barite is if they can't sell it, it's gotta go into the tailings. That's gonna increase the size of the tailings by 25%. Gonna increase the potential for, again, leakage, also gonna crank up the cost. Future demand and prices. Palmer's gonna be very sensitive to zinc prices. If we see issues with the zinc market, that could really sink Palmer, given its real dependence on zinc versus a couple of the other minerals. Existing reserves of silver and copper are currently more than adequate to meet the demand, and there are significant potential for additional reserves, much, much bigger than Palmer, that are out there. And also, there is no significant need for the Palmer project to provide metals that would address climate change. Capital costs. Kuipers has seen throughout the industry that in general, the PEAs vastly underestimate costs, up to about 50%. And if we see more realistic estimates, that could start to push the project into uneconomical. And again, this PEA, it's just a piece of paper. It's a prediction. It doesn't guarantee anything. I've been dealing with mining companies who said, well, we're not going to pollute the water because we went through an environmental assessment, we produced a document, and the environmental assessment concluded there be no pollution. Again, a prediction on paper, not a guarantee of future events. And given how overly optimistic these are usually, you can expect problems down the line. The environmental risks, underestimated. It actually doesn't evaluate additional cost if you have to put the barite into the tailings pond, which could crank the cost up. Costs relative to design and closure are based on an assumption, an unsupported assumption, that there won't need to be any post-closure water treatment for acid mine drainage or other issues. That assumption is based on preliminary info. The Greens Creek mine, which is compared to this mine a lot, originally predicted no long-term water treatment, and now it's recognized that long-term water treatment is definitely going to be required. Again, predictions versus reality. And there has been no reclamation plan developed for the project or a cost estimate. So clearly that's going to crank up the cost. Again, a little more on prediction versus reality. This is some work Kuipers did. They looked at a number of hard rock mines that went through NEPA process and found that predicted no water quality problems. 93% of them impacted surface waters negatively. Mines predicted, that did predict exceedances and impose mitigation, 73% still impacted surface waters negatively. 76% of the mines studied in detail exceeded water quality standards, and the mitigation measures predicted, to prevent this failed at 64% of the mines. So the risks clearly have not been adequately addressed here. A number of them are actually identified, such as you see here, including avalanche, the construction of the portal, metallurgical work, water management, seismicity, all kinds of things. Those are identified, but the PIA simply assumes those risks can be mitigated. It doesn't include any additional contingencies or costs or caveats with respect to what would happen if the best case does not occur here. And it's not apparent from the information provided that the risks have been adequately addressed, mitigations identified and costed out, and the residual risk considered relevant to the overall economics of the project. Almost done. This is one of my favorite quotes from Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Military people say once the bullets fly, the plan goes out the window. So once you get on the ground, once you get into the reality, we find out that these documents really are not reflective of what's happening there. What could possibly go wrong? What if the document is wrong? What if the EA process makes mistakes? The potential effects on the valley could be catastrophic. And usually that type of acid mine drainage, those type of effects are very hard to rectify. And that's it. This was kind of a cursory look at the PEA because I didn't want to sit up here and read the thing for 2 hours. There are copies of the document over there on the right, some of my cards. Here's some of the folks working on this. If you have questions, please come up to me after the event or ask when we have Q&A. You're welcome to give me a call or give me an email. But I urge folks to really look at these studies, because the last thing I wanted to say is I was reading, or actually looking at an investment website, and there were a couple mining engineers on there and a couple investors. And what they said, I'm gonna have to read this one. A clear warning sign for investors is management giving the go-ahead to projects based on a PEA instead of a full feasibility studies. The PEAs are very often notoriously over-optimistic, and for example, include too much material, meaning ore, because they incorporate the low-level inferred resources that have a low level of confidence. So I urge folks to be very critical as you look at these documents and things coming out of mining companies, especially this early in the stage, because they're overly optimistic, they're full of holes, and there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done to actually produce a feasibility study that would prove more of the contentions that are out now, and that could be taken to a bank to raise money for the project. So that's it. I want to thank you all very much for listening, and I'd be happy to take some questions, I think, toward the end of the presentations here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very, very much, Chris. Next up, we've got Guy Archibald.
Yes. Yes, thank you. My name is Guy Archibald. I work for Rivers Without Borders. I'm an analytical environmental chemist by trade. I used to work for the mining industry. In fact, in the small world that we live in nowadays, I actually worked with Jim Kuipers way back in 1979 at a uranium mine down in southeastern Utah. So I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm going to basically cover three things, and I'm going to have to do it kind of quick because it's a lot of material. I'm going to look at the Greens Creek mine, in particular because it's been compared directly with the Palmer mine, a very similar type of ore body, similar type of mining methods that are proposed. And who wouldn't want to compare themselves with the richest silver mine in the United States? And right now, there is a comment period open for its third expansion. It's been operating about 33 years. This is its third expansion. I believe the public comments, and now, I just found out, I've been extended to May 20th, since I made the slide, of course. And I'll put this information up at the end. So I'm going to quickly kind of talk about a real cursory comparison between Greens Creek and the Palmer. And again, there's not a lot of information on how they're going to actually mine the Palmer until they get to a feasibility. So it's a little cursory. I kind of had to make some pictures because they don't exist, and I did my best of my ability to make sure they're all in scale and everything. Then I'm going to talk about a study that I did for Friends of Admiralty Island on Hawk Inlet, looking at why, trying to find out why and what the source of lead contamination is in Hawk Inlet. And then finally, I'm going to kind of talk about kind of what went wrong here. And when I say what went wrong, Greens Creek is the only mine in the nation that's allowed to operate in a national monument. And it was done so under a very high level of regulatory requirements. And it's nothing to do with the mining company itself. Hecla Mining does exactly what the regulators tell them to do. They go over and above. And believe me, having been around mines are incredibly complex, very impressive feats of human engineering. You know, they're quite impressive. But things can go wrong, and that is something that everyone should keep in mind as we go through the Palmer process. So currently, this green picture is the current state of the tailings pile at Greens Creek. It's about 5,700,000 cubic yards of tailings. Again, they've been operating for about 33 years. They produce, and it averages about 525,000 tons of tailings that go into the tailings pile per year. They put somewhere between 40 and 50% of the tailings back underground at paste tailings. So what we know from the PEA, over 11-year life of mine, they proposed that particular tailings pile. The pictures, it looks upside down to me, but it's just kind of a speculatory thing. It's in a valley, and I'll show you where it is. It's from toe to top, it's about 164 feet tall, and it's on a slope, so the tailings are only about 98 feet thick at any given time there. But that's what they're proposing for 11 years. So looking back at the Greens Creek tailings pile, this is a model of the fugitive dust that's coming off of that pile right now as it is built. It's a model based on EPA model. Models are something you gotta be aware of. Models are not necessarily reality, excuse me. It's not based on their actual monitoring. And it's relative, you know, low to high. It's not giving you actual amounts. And they estimate that there'll be fugitive dust will be detectable up to 2 miles away from that tailings pile. And this is as it is now. Despite all of its mitigation, and they do a lot of mitigation, snow fences, try to leave the snow on it, and compacting the tailings as they're dumped. The Forest Service estimates that that pile contributes 100 tons of fugitive dust each and every year to the surrounding lands. That fugitive dust, the tailings are 0.61% lead by weight, so if you do a little math, you can find out it's about 1,200 pounds of just lead, not lead compounds, lead, that's spreading out around the land there. This is what it would look like when fully reclaimed, if they were to stop today and not make it any bigger. And it has its cover on it. This is taken about a mile away from Hotch Point, so you're looking at what the tailings pile visual impact would be about a mile away from Hotch Point. You notice there's no trees that are going to grow on there. They probably can't allow trees to grow on there, because if the wind throw, the root ball pulls them up and it exposes the tailings underneath of the cover. That pile, right now as it sits, will require active water treatment for hundreds of years, if not forever, what they say. So you're gonna have to produce energy, you're gonna have to have personnel on the ground, you're gonna have to collect all the water, treat it, discharge it. This picture with the big circle is the visual impacts according to the PEA. Everywhere in kind of that purple color, you should be able to see that tailings pile. And within that blue cone is any ship going by there, we'll see that tailings pile. And quite honestly, if you're that far away down south, that tailings pile is going to be a very small speck. So you may be able to see it, but your eyes are better than mine. So the Palmer and the PEA, they've looked at different places that they would like to put tailings, and they picked that particular spot on a little bit of an upland shelf right above the Klahini River, right off that corner of Glacier Creek. And I can tell you, again, every mine, the Greens Creek when it started was an 11-year life of mine. In 2005, they applied for a 22-year life of mine. It only lasted about 11 years. Then they applied for a 30 to 50 year, they're only given 10 years, because they are constantly doing exploration. The Palmer companies don't talk about a mine, they talk about a mining district. And there's many locatable mineral deposits in that district. This isn't gonna be one mine, and it's not gonna just last 11 years. It's probably, if this goes, if it's economically viable, every 10 years you're gonna be going through another 8. So when they say that, oh, we decided to put the tailings there, chances are 20, 30 years from now, you have tailings in all those little green spots there. This is my rendition of what that pile would look like from a Google Earth view. Obviously, if you're down at road level, it would look a lot shorter than that, but that's about where it's located there, that's on the highway. To give it a little more perspective, this would be the footprint of the tailings pile superimposed on Haines. This is as it sits right now. If indeed they could not sell the barite, the tailings pile would be about 25% larger. And the footprint may not be that bigger, but it would certainly be taller. So again, you're talking a tailings pile, it's gonna be subject to fugitive dust. It's probably gonna have to be active water treatment. Once it's there, that water treatment may have to last forever. You don't know until they actually do the testing. So the last time Greens Creek went through its expansion in 2013, the forest supervisor faced a dilemma. There was two kind of competing laws. The laws that came out of the 1872 Mining Act said that every mining company with valid claims has the right to lease adjacent public lands for mill purposes and dumping tailings. But this mine is in a national monument under a NILCA where it cannot create irreparable harm to the values of the monument, the scientific, educational, historic, prehistoric, cultural values of this very valuable island, Admiralty Island. And they asked, again, at 30 to 50 years, the forest supervisor at the time could not reconcile these two laws. And so he kicked the can down the road, gave him a 10-year authorization, and said, we hope that we allow, during these 10 years, to gather more information so the next person that has to decide this does not face that dilemma. But the Forest Service didn't do anything. And so people like Friends of Admiralty, a complete volunteer organization, stood up to try to do something. In 2015, they went in with Dr. Ridgway from Oceanus and sampled, did a huge thorough sampling job in Hawk Inlet, trying to decide if the original baseline studies that had never been repeated since the mine started could be repeated. They found widespread contamination throughout subsistence foods, clams, shrimp, and crabs. And that data was given to the Forest Service and pretty much ignored. So later on, we did this clamshell study. Clams are an indicator organism. The mine samples, they used to sample clam tissues until the clams got too scarce. Now they sample muscle tissue. But they're indicators. They indicate what's going on in the environment. And as a clam lives and makes that shell, accretes that shell, it's incorporating what's ever in the sediment and the water into that shell. And so it gives you a pretty good idea of what's in the environment. And part of the reason we used clam shells is because of the uplift. So we could get raised beach deposits. Obviously, there's not going to be any tissue in a 100-year-old clam, but then we could date it, and I'll show you how we did that. But why did we go about this particular study? We noticed in all the reports that the mine and DEC was putting out, they were noticing lead exceedances on the uplands and in the fresh water. And they would say, well, that was more likely due to fugitive dust, blowing from the tailings pile and landing in reducing acidic environments and becoming bioavailable. But then they saw lead in the marine environment in Hawk Inlet, and they said, oh, that must be due to natural erosion of the mineralized rocks. Well, in science, when you have two different explanations to explain the same phenomena, usually you have a problem. Usually one of them is wrong. So this study was designed to discern the difference between the man-made sources of lead and natural sources of lead. And that's what that was the objective of it.
Guy, could you define exceedances? I hear that a lot and I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
So there's exceedances in regulatory limits. Alaska does not have regulatory limits for sediment and tissue. We have water quality limits. So what they do is they look at trends and they say, well, here's our baseline, and then it may, if it starts going up, it's exceeding that baseline. So we're seeing lead showing up where it never showed up before. It exceeds the natural baseline. So here's Hawk Inlet in a schematic, Young's Bay on the other side. We used Young Bay as our natural area, and we sampled the tide lands down there. At low tide, we would get living clams, and then we would go identify these raised beach deposits and get clams from these raised beach deposits. And then we did that in Young Bay, and then we did that in Hawk Inlet where the Greens Creek Delta comes off. You can see the Greens Creek Delta, and then the tailings disposal facility, the TDF, and then the Hawk Inlet ore loading station up there. And it was, we could date these things because the area is experiencing natural uplift, isostatic rebound. And it's been measured very precisely. And so we find these raised beach deposits, we can age them because we know the rate the land is rising. We can go back down to mean low sea level because that's where the clams would live when they were alive. And we could easily calculate how old these shells were, the age when they were alive. We also did radiometric dating just to be sure this method of dating the shells was working, and it did. So what did we find when we put this all together? Pretty much there's a Hawk Inlet over time. In Hawk Inlet there was a lot more opportunities to find raised beaches. So we hit that baseline going back almost 2,000 years, or over 2,000 years. And it kind of fluctuates a little bit. And then just recently, and the living shells, zoom, they go way up. Now we kind of see the same relationship going on over in Young Bay, but notice the difference of the axis over there. It kind of peters along and then shoots up. So if we look at the actual numbers kind of behind this, what do we see? And what went wrong there? Hold on. Okay, something went wrong there. But I'm gonna have to do a quick escape here. I apologize for this. I'm not sure what went wrong. Okay, ignore that little living thing. So both sides started off about the same. And there's only about 11% difference in the historic pre-mining shells. The Young Bay actually indicates a little bit more lead. But the shells we noticed were bigger over in Young's Bay. We tried to keep them all the same size. But 10% is well within the error margin. But then we noticed that they ended up very different. The Young Bay shells increased about 100 parts per billion. The Hawk Inlets increased almost 400 parts per billion. So the difference between those two is like 50%. Hawk Inlet shells showed 50% more lead in the living samples than the living samples in Young Bay. So if we break it down by the bay and historic and prehistoric, the change in Young Bay went up 40% from the historical baseline to the living. Hawk Inlet increased almost 95%. So if you do the math backwards and you take the 40% off of 95, you end up just about with the 50% difference. So the math kind of worked that way. So obviously something's going on in Hawk Inlet that we're not seeing in Young Bay. Lead also has various isotopes. There's actually about 46 isotopes of lead, if I remember right, but 4 of them are what they call the stable isotopes. Lead 204 is the natural isotope, and that 1.4 means that's how abundant it is in the Earth's crust. The other 3 stable isotopes are breakdown products of uranium disintegration, thorium disintegration. But what that does is you can actually trace where lead comes from based on its stable isotope fingerprint. So like in forensics, they can trace a bullet back to its manufacturer based on the stable isotopes. They can trace where gasoline came from, what oil well produced that gasoline based on the stable isotopes of lead. This stable isotope analysis was not definitive. We did not get a level of certainty to make real clear conclusions on it. Basically because the ore body was basically the same from the Young Bay side to the Hawk Inlet side. It's basically the same ore body, and sure enough, Hekla's, looking at they're drilling that like crazy over there because they know there's good ore down there. So the larger number means there's a bigger difference between the two comparisons. The smaller number means there's not much difference. So we look at, just going from the top real quick, Hawk Inlet historic is fairly different from the Hawk Inlet during the production era. The Hawk Inlet historic is also pretty different, greater than 1, than the tailings, the stable isotopes in the tailings. But the Hawk Inlet current samples, the productions, during the production area, and the tails, there's not much difference in stable isotopes there at all. So it's almost a match there. And we also going to go into Young's Bay, the historic Young's Bay samples and the current Young's Bay samples. Yeah, there's not much difference between the stable isotopes. But if you look at the Young's Bay historic samples and the tailings, they don't match. And if you look at the Young's Bay tailings versus the Young's Bay living ones versus the tailings, they don't match either. So it seems like, and again seems, because we don't have a certainty, that the source of the lead in Hawk Inlet is coming from the tailings, but not into a definitive sense. Let's take a minute here, and what was the intent of Congress when the passing of NILCA? When they said the word irreparable harm, they did that very purposefully. And it does not matter the intensity of the harm. It's any injury, great or small. And that's the going in, they knew this back in the 80s when they did their first mine analysis. So how did we get here a little bit? I'm gonna do a quick little history. So prior to mining, knowing and full knowledge of ANILCA, the mining company then defined that, well, what we need to protect here, the monument value that we need to protect, is the biological community, both in the water and on the upland. And so they did this incredible baseline study where they looked at the species diversity and population in the marine environment, in the uplands. They looked at all the critters in the tidelands. They looked at deer, they looked at eagles, they looked at bear. They looked at the freshwater environment, the number of fish, periphyton, benthic macroinvertebrates. They did this incredible baseline study. And that was the study that was to use, they stated, was to be used to see what the effects of mining in this particular place would do. They were supposed to do it every year for the first 5 years. And the first decision, a few years later, the Forest Service decided that they looked at where to discharge the wastewater. They looked at the alternatives, one being discharging it into Hawk Inlet, and they rejected that because they didn't know what the effects would be to the biological community. So the discharge was supposed to be out in Chatham Strait. They did say, though, that at a future date, if they could prove that the discharge wouldn't harm it, they would be okay with it being moved back in. At this point, they were designing a watered tailings facility, a dam with a water cover, not a dry stack. That's how it was first permitted. Little interlude here, just so we're on the same page. A biological community is the population studies, population trends, not only in a species, but between species. Is one species getting more? Is one species going down over a long period of time? Are there intergenerational changes, over generations? That's how you look at a community. 5 years later, the mining company wanted an amendment, and the amendment only went through an EA process, not a full-blown EIS. They wanted to change to a dry stack. During this process, the wastewater discharge went from Chatham Strait back into Hawk Inlet. It was never built. They put it into Hawk Inlet. And the state said, well, we'll set water quality standards. So effluent standards, we're gonna limit the amount of effluent, and we're gonna check the fresh water to monitor Hawk Inlet. And so a monitoring program was established to determine compliance with effluence limits for a wastewater discharge, not for measuring harm to the biological community. This is where it all started to kind of go wrong. The possibility of fugitive dust wasn't even mentioned, and they predicted their acid-base counting said there would be no acid mine generation. Well, that's just what happens when you model things sometimes. So this is how it's measured now. They use two different approaches. An effluent limit approach. So they regulate how much effluent, the quality of the effluent the mine can dump in there. They can dump effluent into a mixing zone. It's 22 times the aquatic life criteria for lead within that mixing zone, and then it's supposed to dilute in the mixing zone and reach water quality criteria at the edge. Now, just recently, they started this risk model approach, where they look at each and every constituent in the environment, and they say, well, is this a risk to that particular creature? In the APTES permit up here, in the effluent limit approach, there's a problem with that, because they look at each and every metal separately. They don't ask what happens when you get these metals acting together. They're all based pollutant by pollutant by pollutant. And the data that they're getting from monitoring the effluent, that's what's fed into the risk model. So they're going out there and they're testing the tissue of mussels and these little annelid worms in the soil. They're testing just the tissues. They also do some sediment and they do some water quality testing. But is that testing the biological community? If I take a chunk out of Jones Hotch there and I test it for metals, every 4 months, then can I say that the entire community of Haines and Chilkat is being protected? But that's basically what's happening here now. And the odd thing is that population density and diversity are measured everywhere out there. They're measured in the periphyton in the fresh water, the benthic macroinvertebrates. Periphyton is algae. They keep track of the eagle nests and change the eagle density, brown bear density, deer density, fish populations in the fresh water. They look at how the different user groups are coming and going from Hawk Inlet and how that's changing over time. They even look at the effects of having a lot of miners and mine communities due to Juno. How does it change the base tax rate and the number of kids in the school? They do this everywhere out there, except for Hawk Inlet. And the mine's own Hawk Inlet reports for 8 years had that paragraph in it. Basically, the health of Hawk Inlet could be best measured by looking at species diversity and populations, but that data just doesn't exist. Actually, it did. It existed and then it disappeared for many years. And it's strangely enough, not drawing any conclusions here, but when it was uncovered, that paragraph disappeared from Hawk Inlet reports from then on. I have a copy of that baseline data over there, if anybody wants to see it. So I think the lesson here is you can have these very strict, very letter of the law, clear standards. And it's the monitoring you have to watch. How are those standards tested? What are you testing that against? And then be really careful when somebody uses a model. I'm going to use this model, a mixing zone model, a dust model. Unless you actually go out and collect field data to verify that model's like me building a plastic airplane. It can be nice and detailed as much as it is. but I'm not gonna climb in there and fly it. It's just a model. And as we're gonna protect the valley, and we're gonna protect all these resources that everybody loves and the reason that you live here, we have to be very diligent that if this mine goes through and everybody pays attention, how are they measuring these things? Are they, the objective of the measurement match the objective of the standard they're trying to meet? Because right now, even though there's the no irreparable harm standard in Greens Creek, nobody's measuring harm in Hawk Inlet. It's not even being measured. So, again, there's the draft information, and that's it for me.
Thank you, guys. We're pretty good on time. We have one more presentation, and then we'll go to questions. Okay, our next presenter is John Neary. John works for Friends of Admiralty.
I have an image to show you. I'm just going to the old-fashioned way. So I am the president of Friends of Admiralty.
Hey, John, can you-
Oh.
Okay. Oh, you want to zoom? That way I'll move around a lot so they can't follow me. So I'm the president of Friends of Admiralty. I've been a Juneau resident since 1982, living out by Tea Harbor. And I started out as a wilderness ranger on Admiralty Island when I came from Sitka, paddling a canoe back and forth across the island with Garfield George from Angoon, and learning from the people of Angoon where I lived at that time, before I moved to Juneau. And the Friends of Admiralty was formed in 1987. KJ Metcalf, key founder, John Sisk, and others. Mostly to try to urge the Forest Service to do a better job of managing the Admiralty National Monument, one of the very few monuments that the Forest Service manages anywhere. You probably know monuments throughout the nation. About 98% of them are managed by other agencies than the Forest Service. So Forest Service doesn't have a long history or tradition. Misty Fjords, of course, would be the other exception. So Greens Creek Mine, when I started, was not in production yet. I remember my first trip out there was like in '83, and went up the road and at the cannery at the time, I think it was. And I was really very neutral. I had nothing to do with management of the mine at all. I was, again, paddling a canoe across the island, and later on replacing foundation under cabins and building trails and this kind of thing. That was my job for 30 years in the backcountry of Admiralty. I did learn to fall in love with that island, though. Very precious moments with our crews out in these remote bays. Really learning a lot about what it meant to be a wild place, and also learning how the people who had lived there for centuries really cared for that place and what their traditions were and how we could learn from them. And so I kind of brought that forward, and then eventually became the visitor center director at Mendenhall, and that's where I wrapped up my last 6 years with the Forest Service. I retired 4 years ago. That's my story. And after retirement, I became the Friends of Admiralty. Only like a year now have I been the president of that organization. And we're small, and we're focused on this island only, and focused on its overall health and its specialness. It's the people that are on it. It's a very meaningful place for us. And I was thinking this evening even, the name Friends, as Jones pointed out so well in his presentation to start with, we do need to move from communities to friends. Absolutely we do. And it's inherent in our name. And I was thinking about what that means to me and this presentation tonight. And the reason why I'm here tonight is because Guy was essentially contracted to do this study for us, because we wanted to see, we all had this uneasy feeling about DEC and their role in monitoring the mine, and whether that was really effective or not, especially when a seal came up from a hunter and the liver came up with extremely high levels of mercury in it, and this really shocked Angoon. But DEC said, well, seals are migratory, don't really know where they were. Can't really say they got that from honking, which is true, of course. But that was one red flag, and we wanted to see if there were any more red flags out there, so we contracted this study, and we think I came up with a red flag. And we feel like our basic ask to the Forest Service is to reproduce that baseline study, because what we want that baseline study to tell us is that everything's fine. We really want to tell us that everything is fine. We want to believe that that the accumulation of lead in Hawk Inlet is really no different than the global average as the mine asserts. But we don't really trust that yet, and especially with this red flag that's been waved. But the reason I'm here tonight was because I was skiing with Ben up around Sheep Mountain, Roberts, a few weeks ago, and I got this text. It was a pretty nice day, so when you're up in the snow in the high country, you can't really see your text, I'm trying to read this thing. It's from my son-in-law. He lives up in Anchorage. He was an exploration geologist for the Greens Creek mine, first as an intern and then as a paid geologist for a number of years. And prior to that, I hadn't really thought much about the Greens Creek mine, honestly. I really hadn't. I was very neutral about it. But then when he came home one evening and announced that his lead levels were elevated, and we started thinking more about lead. And this was tested in his bloodstream, of course, because he was working underground quite a bit then. And the mine does a good job of trying to protect employee health and safety. Don't take what I just said wrong in the sense that I'm not accusing anybody of violating their employees' health, because I think they're very serious about safety. But we were just concerned about future son-in-law who was working underground a lot and had elevated lead, and what does that mean to human health and our population in general and the environment out there. But I got a text while I was skiing with Ben, and it's from the same son-in-law who's moved on to Anchorage. He's working in a different role. And in it he said, John, I just got this random text from a friend of mine, an old roommate in Juneau. I said, oh, okay. What was that? He said, well, he said, you're no friend of Greens Creek. And I thought, well, that is pretty random. It's kind of weird. And it probably had something to do with the articles that had just come out in the Juneau Empire where I was quoted, and then later another My Turn that I wrote for the Juneau Empire, raising a number of these kinds of questions about, that I just posed to you about lead and what its role is and how concerned should we be. And I had never really considered myself an enemy of the Greens Creek mine, honestly. I'd been talking to them in their offices for about a year about trying to produce geopolymer from their tailings so we could come up with a potential solution to ever-increasing piles of tailings out there. We had good productive meetings, and then during the course of those meetings, long before Guy's report was released to the public, I released it to them weeks ahead of time in order to give them an idea of exactly what our position was, where we were going, see if they could answer it in some rational way, and this kind of thing. I thought we were really dealing with them very straightforwardly. So it was a little weird to get that text both in the context as well as in its implications. So if we're not labeled friends of Greens Creek Mine, then we are still friends of Admiralty. We hope to get back on a friendship level with the Greens Creek Mine at some point. I have met a number of times with their mine manager, Brian Erickson, and I found him to be a straight shooter, mostly telling us exactly what their operating conditions were and what their challenges they face and all these kinds of things. We're developing a good rapport. I attended the Miners Association breakfast, and he called me out in the audience and said, well, this is a new partnership we're trying to develop with the Friends of Admiralty. And we're not sure what it is. We're not sure where it's going either, but it's an interesting one. We're going to try to work with it. And who knows if we'll get back to that. Right now, we're on opposite sides of a story and tossing arrows at each other. But this is the way an EIS works, right? This is the process in which you try to influence a decision maker to make a decision in your favor. And some of that's worked out in the public realm where it becomes harder to be seen as friends when you have different viewpoints. So we definitely have different viewpoints at this point. We really clearly think that baseline has to be reproduced so we can tell what the effects on bear and deer and eagle and all the marine or benthic organisms, all these things. We need a full array. We don't want just the water column tested, we want the full array. We'd also like to see what the long-term plan is for those tailings and how many more years are going to be accumulated, where are they going to be piled, how are they safely going to be accounted for, and most importantly, we feel like this fugitive dust that Guy labeled as the problem pretty darn well in his report, as much as it's not completely conclusive, it's a very important red flag to pay attention to. And the mine says in the meeting that we had last week in June, last Saturday, Mike Satry, the spokesperson for the mine, said, yeah, we understand the conditions when fugitive dust is produced. It's in those very cold days in the winter when the relative humidity hovers, you know, down there at that 15% range, and the winds are blowing strong, and that dust layer on the top of the pile blows into the surrounding forest, accumulates in vegetation, soils, and according to Guy's study, eventually winds up in the marine organisms as well. So if we know it, then we feel like it has to be prevented, because our position is that it is causing irreparable harm to the monument. And it's not new. It's been predicted, as Guy said, in that EIS. It was in 2013, I think that's the date you had. When I first started collecting lichen for the Forest Service in wild areas around the Tongass in order to establish baseline of air qualities, because as many of you probably know, lichens, a number of species, collect atmospheric heavy metals and other trace chemicals that are in the atmosphere, and they accumulate over time. And because they're not in contact with the soil, you can really isolate it to what is atmospheric. And the lead levels in the lichens around the mine that I read in the report from, this was 20 years ago, were really very high even then. Not surprisingly, when they're adjacent to a tailings pile with an acknowledged wind problem and a very low relative humidity that causes lots of dust at those specific times. So if it's really limited, if this really is a limited phenomenon as the mine asserts, then perhaps it's also predictable. And if it's predictable, how might it be preventable? Those are the series of questions that we have for the Forest Service before they issue another permit. That's about all I have to say. And I hand it over to Derek and we'll move on to questions, I think.
Thanks, John. I think we'll get all of our presenters up here now, and we'll take some questions. Before we get too much farther, I want to be sure to thank Tori Larson and Jessica Plachta for helping us with our tech here. They're from Lake Conservation. And folks on Zoom, if you want to text questions in, Tori can pass them up to me. Any questions from the audience? Go ahead, Alan.
Maybe Guy, I'm wondering if you can just generally talk about what is known about the baseline of the biodiversity in the Chilkat Valley.
What I know about it?
Or, you know, what is available so that as Green Creek, or not Green Creek, as Palmer may be developed, we would have something to go by to find out if we are being impacted.
I don't myself have a
Or
lot
maybe
of
Derek.
information. Derek probably has a lot. What I do know is if they go into an EA or EIS process, they'll want to look at all available information out there. I would say all available information. They should also include well-done citizen-funded science that they tend to not want to think about. And then I think when you look at the set of all available information, you need to look at where's the gaps. Where's the gaps? And then who's gonna fill those gaps? Because DEC doesn't collect samples themselves. DNR doesn't collect samples themselves. It needs to be, you know, the people that love this valley to collect those samples, like Derek, I know is doing.
There's some baseline data being collected by Chilkat Indian Village with Takshanuk Watershed Council's help. Constantine collects a lot of data, some of it's available, it goes into their reports and their proposals. And Constantine contracts with the Department of Fish and Game. They've been doing a study every June. They go and do quite an extensive sampling. It's limited by time and budget, but it's a good study. So there's some being accumulated, but it's still early in those efforts.
And just a little follow-up, are those studies of like bioconcentrations of specific minerals in organisms, or just the general diversity and population of
The sampling we're doing is of metals concentrations and that sort of thing in water, just from water samples. We sample benthic macroinvertebrates just to get a diversity and mostly just a diversity, but what's living in the water now in Glacier Creek and in the community. Fish and Game takes tissue samples from Dolly Martin and tests those to see baseline levels of metals and things that you might see, post-production after mine goes into production. Other questions? Ashley?
Hi, I'm Ashley Heinrich Sage. I was born in Ketchikan, and as of August, I will live here for 50 years. So, and I just, for full disclosure, I have 2 of my family members work at Hecla, so I came just to hear what was going to be said. And I learned something tonight from Mr. Zimmer that the PEA kind of doesn't mean a whole lot. So it seems like the next study and the next study after that are years off. So I'm wondering why there's all this panic right now until they actually figure out whether it's viable or not. And then also for Mr. Archibald, were there clam studies other than Hawk Inlet and Young Bay, were there like in the Haines Harbor or out Mud Bay? Were there any other ones that we can go, oh, that's really stupidly high, or maybe medium high? You know what I mean? Were there other studies nearby? Thank you.
This is if I was gonna get any questions tonight, that was the first one you asked, I was almost positive that was coming. So I actually had prepared some thoughts on that one, because it's a very sensible question. What are we getting all worked out about if there's no certainty there will be a mine, and if there is a mine, it's a long way off? So a couple answers there. One is even the exploration create problems. If they go underground and dig this at it, and I'm gonna get over my head here pretty quick, and I'm gonna turn that over to Guy, you're creating a potential acid mine drainage source, even with exploration. So exploration activities can be damaging to the environment. The biggest worry I have, though, is a Tulsa Chief type situation, which is an abandoned mine up in the Taku on the BC side that's been leaking acid mine drainage for 6 decades and still hasn't been cleaned up. And the worry here is that the mine could go in, it could operate for a few years, and the Tulsa Chief closed because metal prices crashed. That's why it closed in '57. So the worry here is you get a mine in there that may not be overly economical, that may be very sensitive to zinc prices, the market, the barite plan. They operate for a couple years, they go bankrupt, and then a big mess is left. And usually the bonding that's required by the mine, Alaska does it better than BC, but usually there's not enough to do it. And once you get acid mine drainage loose in the environment, what we're seeing at the Tulsa Chief, it's incredibly difficult to stop because the terrain, the amount of water movement, you can't stop the rain, you can't stop the snow. It's very hard to contain that water in something and treat it. What the mine up in what Tulsa Chief is proposing is releasing the acid mine discharge into the river and using it as a mixing zone. Not the best strategy here. So there's worry about the exploration activities. There's worry about a potential bankrupt leaving a mess out there. And there's also the worry about, is this the economic, is it horse wagon that Haines wants to hitch its horse to? This may be distracting from a whole lot of other activities, other economic issues, other economics. I'm not an economist, so I couldn't say what Haines needs to do with its economy, but this could be a big distraction from other things that actually could become a reality, that could provide economic benefits right now, rather than in the future there. So those are pretty much the 3 answers I came up with about why we're kind of getting worked up with. And every mine starts as an exploration project anyway. So it's hard to say, well, we'll get worked up when the mine is in there. If you don't set standards up front, if you don't get the studies, if you don't get stuff like that, and the mine goes in without the proper safeguards, then you have a problem as well. So let me leave it at that, and I don't know if I want to talk quickly about the whole there.
Well, I would answer your question. So there's not a lot of other studies in the United States using clam shells. It's been used over in Europe to trace lead from various mining projects, and that's basically what I based the study off of. There's a lot, mostly here we use tissue, but again, Alaska doesn't have tissue standards, what's too much, what's too little. Tissue is not, even in the EIS, it states over and over again, tissue is not definitive. Tissue is if I sample your tissue, it's what your levels are right now, today, at that hour, at that very minute I picked it out of you. Because it varies so much, because your body's taking it in, it's getting rid of it, it varies a lot. By using shells, we smooth out all that variability. You're talking that total body that it accumulated throughout its entire life. So there's not a lot of other data using clamshells around the US. What we did in 2015, when we looked at tissue data then, we compared it with Mussel Watch. Mussel Watch is this huge database that also includes clams, even though it says mussels. And what we did was I filtered it all. It's all in a spreadsheet. So I filtered it all for everything that's kind of around that northern end of Admiralty Island. And we crunched all those numbers, and we used that then to compare with what we were getting in Hawk Inlet. And it's a little rough because there's a ton of variability. So for the most part, what we were seeing in Hawk Inlet in mussels and clams was higher than we were seeing elsewhere. There were others elsewhere, there were a lot of levels that were even higher. But if we kind of took the mean of it all and compared it with Hawk Inlet back in 2015 was higher. And I will note that that baseline study that was done on species back in 1978, they literally found hundreds and hundreds of butter clams within a square meter. In 2016, Fish and Game went out there to do a clamshell study, and they couldn't find a single living clam. That was just another one of those red flags. None of these studies are definitive all by themselves, but they're red flags. And I like to say, how many of your smoke detectors need to go off in your house before you go investigate what's going on? I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Scott. More questions? In the back there? Alan?
So latest press release from the Palmer project, they say they're gonna do 9,000 meters worth of core drilling to advance towards the feasibility study. The press release is kind of vague. Reading it looks like they could get there this summer. Are they just being vague with language? And that's pretty unlikely, or?
I can talk about the feasibility study. First of all, if you go from a PEA to a feasibility study, that's a worry. Why are you skipping the PFS, the pre-feasibility study? Usually these things are done in stages, 1, 2, 3. If you're going from one to the other, the question should be why. Why are you not doing the pre-feasibility study? Because that usually provides a lot of information that then goes into the final fees. I could see they could start the feasibility study any day now, but something like that is going to take a couple years to do. And what I saw in that press release is mostly about the construction stuff. The mention of the feasibility study is kind of vague. It definitely did not say when it would start. But even once it starts, you're still looking at a couple years, and then they still have permitting to deal with as well, a whole other issue. But I would really, if you're going to talk to them, I would ask them, why are you jumping from the PEA to the feasibility study and skipping that interim step of the pre-fees? There's got to be a reason they're doing it. It's probably not a good one.
And another one, the Whitmer report mentions that we don't need that copper to move towards sustainable energy. Can you elaborate on that?
Palmer's a small project. That's not going to help us get out of global warming. The amount of minerals in there are very tiny. The copper we need to get us out of, to deal with batteries, to deal with global warming, to deal with that transition to new electricity regime, Palmer is a drop in the bucket there. Yeah, maybe they put that stuff in a pipeline, but it's not it's not even close to a significant amount. There are vastly bigger sources of copper out there. They're in better places. They're less environmentally damaging. You know, if someone's arguing that polymer is necessary to help us with global warming, they're putting one over on you. We'll be able to, if we get these other production up, if we have better battery technology, polymer is going to be irrelevant to global warming because the amount of minerals there are so big. Yeah, it could be a part of it, but it's not necessary, it's not vital, and there are vastly better resources that aren't going to destroy a river like the Chilkat. The Chilkat it's just an incredibly sensitive, wet, fragile area, and if you know the global warming argument is a big one, and it's a very difficult one for us environmentalists to deal with because people are trying to catch us between a rock and a hard place. All right, you guys keep whining about global warming, you're whining about mining, you're whining about everything. What's your solution to this? And our solution to this is, well, don't look at mines like this. You know, when you look at mines that have acid mine problems, that are near resources or near fisheries like this, it's just too dangerous, especially when it's not going to contribute much at all to our push to a new electricity production regime. It's just so small.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Second, sorry, we're on the line now.
More of a comment. My name is Marty Stearns. I'm the Environmental and Surface Operations Manager for Greens Creek. I came here tonight when we found out that this was going to occur and Greens Creek was going to be the example that was going to be used tonight for your consideration on the Palmer project. From an industry standpoint, this is part of the process, the community involvement. You have every right to be concerned and issue your concerns and talk about it. That will be part of the process, the NEPA process, the permitting process. And I urge you to take advantage of that, and I urge the company to be actively involved with you as a community through that process and be open and transparent through the process. That being said, what you heard tonight from Mr. Archibald is a letter to the editor. It's not a scientific study. It's been read by true scientists, PhDs, one PhD that was involved in the baseline that has been commented on through this whole process. And you can see his comments on that on the Forest Service's site as far as their commenting period on the North Extension Plan Supplemental EIS. You need to listen and make your decision based on facts. The best example I can say is the isotope study where he said it was inconclusive, but he still thinks that it indicated that lead is the problem from fugitive dust. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. And the scientists that have reviewed this paper have brought out the errors in the ways of the study. Now, he has every right, and Friends of Admiralty has every right to do it, but you need to listen to it and listen to the facts and make your own decision on that. I'm happy to answer any questions you have on Greens Creek based on what you heard tonight. I'm one of them that's been meeting with John. I give a lot of credit to John being the head of Friends of Admiralty and being open to discussions with us. We each have our perspective on what is happening. If you look at Guy's study, his sample size in most cases was 5. We have 33 years of data. Our sample size is in the tens of thousands. So you need to pay attention and make your decision based on facts, not editorials. Thank you for the opportunity, and like I said, I'll be happy to talk with anybody afterwards.
What facts are you talking about that you have to deliver here? You say make this on facts, you're not providing any.
The facts are, you look through the SEIS that's being considered now and open for public comment is 556 pages of data. The model diagram that Guy showed tonight, that's not real data. That's a model that was based on 1 year of data and EPA standards for modeling. It's not based on what really happened. This is a conservative model that they use, the Forest Service and their consultants use. It's a prediction. It's not true science. The EPA modeler that the Forest Service brought in looked at the data and said, I cannot model this. But they did it anyway. So what you saw in that nice glaringly red diagram was a prediction. It wasn't based on anything other than meteorological data for 1 year and then EPA emission factors. Those are facts. There's lots of facts in the document. I'm happy to share with you our data. Our data is public knowledge or public information on the ADEC website. And that will be the same case as Palmer goes through. The process for Palmer, the PEA, the pre-feasibility, the feasibility, those are what the investors are going to look at. Those are the tools. If they don't meet the standards for the big investors, they won't invest. That's to protect the investors. So if they are uncomfortable, and big money investors are getting more and more uncomfortable with mining, for reasons. There are mines all over the world that have done things the wrong way. We take a lot of pride at Greens Creek, where we think we're doing things the right way. And we're open to show that to you. If you, as citizens of Haines, want to come down and see us, and see the real picture, talk to me. Talk to some of our employees that live here in the community. We like to think we're an open book, and we'd be happy to show you.
Okay, just quick response. Now, we're not gonna quibble, you know, EPA's bad science apparently, or my bad science, or your bad science. But I keep hearing people have reviewed my report, and I keep wondering, what are they reviewing? My spelling and punctuation? Because nobody has requested all of the lab reports from the lab. They've not looked at any of my spreadsheets of data. They're not looked at how that data was used statistically. They haven't looked at any of my field logbooks. They haven't looked at any of my retained samples. We retain samples from each and everything. They can all be retested. We can create more data points. It's a money issue. So when people keep saying they've reviewed my report, I keep wondering, what exactly are they reviewing? Because when you review science, you do a very specific EPA guidance, data validation and verification process to verify and validate that those numbers are real numbers. We peer reviewed that report before it went out the door. Other people looked at it. You know, independent from me, people that I didn't pick or have any influence over. But I keep wondering when people keep telling me they reviewed my report, I mean, is the color off or the paper stock not right? I'm not quite sure.
John,
Brian asked.
can you address that? Because Brian asked you for that data.
He did, yes. As a matter of fact, when that news article first came out, the mine manager, Brian Erickson, did request some of those very things you said based on the last meeting, when you said the same thing. And we'll get it to him. Obviously we will, and we can list all the peer reviewers that did it. He's just been busy, is one of the reasons, because it wasn't that long ago that we received the request.
So we asked for it though.
Yes, they did. Greens Creek Mine did ask for it, and we haven't yet been able to turn it over to them. That is something we have to get to.
But they've already reviewed it.
Well, that's one of the, yes, it's one of the slightly disturbing parts about it is DEC was given that report also, actually about the same time I gave it to Greens Creek staff about a month ago. And then they put out a press release just after our stories came out in the Juneau Empire about this. And the leader of the Division of Water came out with his press release saying this study is flawed, it has all these problems, but again, without the data that neither Brian nor anybody else at DEC had with all this kind of background material, we couldn't really do a hard look at it. So we feel like this is more political positioning than it is science.
Well, I'm on there.
I think the world was deformed.
I just, I mean, there's really gradations of science. There's very, very expensive science, and then there's very, science that's very cost limited. And I really thank you, Guy, for all these years of good work and effort that you've been putting into this stuff and your expertise. The obvious condition is that we started out with a bunch of great science back in the 80s. There was a bunch of great environmental stuff that's been done. And then there was about 3 decades of foot dragging and obfuscation around getting back to that high quality, high resolution, multi-component, multi-species analytics. And my only thought, obviously it seems like the Forest Service is not gonna do it, or maybe they will someday, but the deep pocket is obviously Hecla Greens Creek. Hecla Greens Creek's obviously got the money. They could afford that work. And so why doesn't Hecla Greens Creek fund the work that we all would like to see?
I was just wondering, if any of you guys know that drilling that they're planning on doing at the Palmer project to go down into the earth thousands of feet, how much of that is gonna, what volume are we talking about of tailings that, or, you know, whatever they extract, what's gonna become of that? I mean, we're saying, okay, it's years down the road, but they're gonna be drilling. They're gonna be pulling stuff out from deep in the earth. And that's gonna have acid and stuff in it. What's gonna happen with that? Will they have to, protect it?
I do know that, I don't know the updated details, they do have to mitigate for that and manage the stuff that comes out of the drill holes and the drilling muds, and so they do have permits that you know, state procedures for that. And there was one drill hole that did have water, you know, they hit water that came out, and they have to test the water and manage it. That's the extent of my knowledge as to what's going on.
What they're proposing is an exploration adit, so none of that rock is gonna be ground up real fine and milled into tailings. It's gonna be big, you know, waste rock. And the plans that so far is to use that waste rock in construction, you know, lay down pads, avalanche protection berms, you know, around their infrastructure, so that when the avalanche comes roaring down the hill, it doesn't wipe it out. And to use it that way. And because it's not in the ore body itself, they're just heading towards the ore body, and it's not in the massive sulfide deposit, they don't anticipate it to be, you know, acid generating at all. They'll know when they get there, and they will do a little acid base accounting, and they have plans for segregating that if they do run into any acid rock. At the end of that adit, they're going to then be drilling into the ore body for exploration, and that may be producing some water contamination, further water contamination problem, we don't know. But hopefully they just don't dump it in the ground next to the glacier creek. But yeah, it's mostly just, it's all be waste rock at that point.
Ron, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about the fugitive dust idea before, but considering the rock resource up there, the composition, I guess, of a tailings pile, what do you expect the dust is going to be spreading up there? What minerals?
Well, I don't really know, because I have never seen at least a full analysis of what's in the rock. Because all I've seen is what Constantine, or American Pacific, Dow puts out now, and they focus on the payable, you know, the copper, the gold, and the barite. I do know in the AG zone there is more lead in there, they show, than copper or gold. And they're not extracting that copper, they're not removing it, so it could very well end up in the tailings pile, that lead. I mean, Greens Creek is a, you know, a silver, lead, gold mine, you know, so there, I'm guessing, and I have no data to put it on, but there's probably a lot more lead in the Greens Creek deposit than up there. I don't really know because there hasn't been, you know, they haven't released an entire, you know, all 98 metallic element analysis of there that I've seen anyway.
I just from our early water samples, we've detected selenium in the naturally occurring water, which might indicate that that's in the ore, but coming from the ore body. So that's toxic to biological life. So that might be something that down the road they would have to deal with if they start digging a hole.
Did you pick up any arsenic?
Yeah, there's arsenic in the water too, which occurs frequently throughout the Chilkat Valley, but yes, up there too.
This is a question for Chris and Guy about the toxic release index from EPA. I mean, mines in Alaska are on that index. Is Greens Creek on that index?
Yes, Greens Creek is in the toxic release inventory. They have to report. Yeah, they have to report. And by release, you know, when you look at that, it is in the, you know, contained tailings facility. I think that name, toxic release inventory, is a little misleading. It's not just being released willy-nilly into the environment. It's just all the hazardous waste that they're creating and storing. You know, some of it may get away somewhere or some project.
How does it compare to other mines in the world, let's say?
The Red Dog mine in Alaska, I believe, is the #1 creator of toxic waste in the United States. Greens Creek falls up there pretty high too, as well. I don't know it all off the top of my head, but Alaska in general is the #1 state for toxic release. But it's primarily driven by the Red Dog.
Liz?
This is in reference to your presentation, Chris, what are the arrangements for water treatment at Greens Creek in this hundreds of years in the future?
Well, I can get back to you as well. I'll be kind of economics guy.
What are the
And
arrangements?
then like, is it written in a contract somewhere that it will be continued to be managed in the
So,
future?
Greens Creek, they do what's called a reclamation bond, and they try to anticipate all of the known factors that are gonna have to be reclaimed. Of course, that doesn't cover any catastrophic act of God unknown thing. And you could probably tell me it's what,
You want me to address it?
300 million, something like that now, the reclamation bond.
The reclamation bond at Greens Creek right now is about $120 million, and it does include the perpetual water treatment. That is, we are held to that. We did not volunteer for the perpetual. That is what the state and federal have told us we have to do. Our plan is to close that, either remove the tails pile, which is, as Guy referred, we put about half of the tails that we produce out of our mill back underground, either as paste, backfill, which in essence becomes concrete and stabilizes the mine so we can recover areas that are adjacent to already mined out areas. So about half of the tails goes back underground, half goes to the tails facility, the dry stack facility. Ideally, at the end of the mine, we would either put it back underground or sell it. There's a lot of metal, valuable metal left in that tails pile because our process of milling and recovery is not the most efficient. With our restricted size, because we are on the National Monument, our mill size is very constricted. So we grind up the ore, run it through a flotation process, and then filter press it to remove the water so that we can have the dry stack. And our dry stack is normally, the tails we put on the pile is about 11% moisture. That's the sweet spot we can hit with our filter presses. So we minimize the amount of water that goes into that dry stack. So the water treatment plant was, unlike what Guy said, that was planned from the beginning because we knew we were gonna have to treat water through the entire process. So that mill has been there, it's actually expanded through the years to meet some of the additional runoff that we're seeing, whether it's from the stack or whatever. The thing that people need to keep in mind as far as the dry stack, that is constructed on a liner, actually 2 layers of liner. It has catchment systems, pipes running through that collect the water from either the hydrostatic pressure underneath the groundwater that's what wells up. We collect that, run it through. Some of that is released to the environment, some is taken into the water treatment plant or used in our wheel wash. We also collect the water that's at the bottom of the stack, that's above the liner, and that is taken to our water treatment facility. So we treat everything that hits that stack. We are required by our permit that anything that drives on that stack goes through the wheel wash that I talked about. So if we drive a truck out onto the stack, we have to run it through our wheel wash to clean the tails material off that before it goes onto the road back up to the mill. So that's a long-winded answer to your question is the bond takes into consideration the water treatment plant, and that bond with this expansion will increase just because of the inflation, and it's been 5 years. Well, actually it's been, 2020 was the last bond recalculation that we did. And that took us from about 90 million up to a little over 120 million. So that bond is to address those catastrophic failures, or if we walked away. And Hecla's been at it for 100 and some years. We're not gonna walk away. We're in the business to create silver, to make silver. Our shareholders expect us to produce a product. But we also have to maintain our license to mine. And that means doing it in a compliant manner, an environmentally conscious manner. You can ask the guys that live here about the 4 Ps that we live by, our core values. That's keeping our people safe, keeping the planet safe, and keeping our property safe, our equipment, because if we don't take care of all 3 of those, we lose our license to operate. The 4th P is production. If we take care of the first 3, production takes care of itself. And hearing from Jones tonight, I added a 5th P in my notes, patience. That's a lot of wisdom in that one letter. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. I hope, did I answer it?
More questions? Sir, you had your hand up there.
Okay, so the question I have, the Chilkat and the Lani, both are streams that have a lot of sediment in them. And do you know how much sediment comes down and how, say, if this is a mining area up there, how much mineral is already in the water? Does anyone know that?
Those streams are full of sediment just for a few months of the year. Actually, most of the year they're clear. And so we've been taking water samples at those different times, and so is Constantine. So we have quite a bit of data. And in those times of the year when that water runs clear and it's coming out of the ground, I mean literally right out of the ground at the Palmer project, there's hardly anything in it. It's cleaner probably than the water that comes out of the tap here in Haines.
That's easy.
So how many millions of tons of sediment come down that river, if you know it? The
Yeah,
Chilkat.
oh, lots. I mean, yeah.
Oh, did I say the Chilkat? I'm sorry, I meant the Chilkat.
Yeah, lots of sediment coming from the glaciers, we're eroding off the hillsides. But it's not, I think that what you're getting at is, what comes from a tailings pile or what comes, is discharged from a mine is not just sediment, there's lots of other constituents in there. The sediment is maybe one of the main concerns, in a fish stream, obviously, but they all have to be managed in some way. Questions? Gershon?
Yeah, I have a question, Guy. You mentioned that in the Greens Creek testing, the DEC is looking at individual pollutants and maybe not necessarily seeing the big picture for synergism or cumulative impacts. And maybe this gentleman here from the mine can answer, but what happened to DEC's whole effluent toxicity regulation, that they're supposed to be looking at the cumulative impacts of all, of all the pollutants that are impacting the water body? Isn't that being done? Aren't they doing wet testing?
As far as I know, it's still just pollutant by pollutant. They do, wet testing is more, it's not effluent limitations, it's the water body. That's in the water body limitations, what they can see in the water body itself, I believe. But I'm probably not up on all that.
We analyzed for 27 different analytes in our freshwater monitoring system. For our effluent, we follow our NPDES permit as far as what they dictate we have to sample in and what intervals that we have to sample for.
Right, but I guess my point is that you can look for 27 different analytes in there, but wet testing, the purpose of wet testing is to be testing them all together to see how they might be interacting with each other and how they work as a group to impact the biota. Testing for individual levels of pollutants might not really give you the best idea of what's really going on in the real world. I was just wondering if they were doing wet testing, but it seems like they should be.
We have historically, but it's not one of our normal testing methods.
I think we got time for one more question, and then maybe we'll move to closing remarks from Vice President Hotch.
Great, thank you. I just would like to know how long some of these mines, like Greens Creek or the Palmer Project, if it goes forward, how long would you expect that a mine like that would need water treatment? What does in perpetuity mean, and what does water treatment result in? Like when the water's getting released from a mine after treatment, whether that's settling or going through a treatment plant or whatever, what does that water look like? Can you drink it, or what's the quality of that water?
Probably not. The mixing zone in Hawk Inlet is designed around the lead that's coming out. Their effluent limit allows them to discharge lead at 22 times the aquatic life standard. And so that mixing zone is designed as a zone of dilution, so that at the edge, outside the edge of that mixing zone, it should be down below water quality criteria. The water quality comes from the ore body. The rock is what drives the water quality. So every mine is different. It's going to be analyzed different by the regulators. It's going to be handled different. There's just a lot of variability. But it's funny, I was talking to Canada, I deal with Canada a lot, and I actually asked them, how long do you think in perpetuity is? And they, without a hesitation, oh, it's 400 years. Oh, okay. Glad to know that,
You said for 100 years?
400 years is what they define as in perpetuity. I'm not sure the state of Alaska has a definition for in perpetuity. But the thing about in perpetuity is not only can anything happen, but everything will actually happen.
One quick, the problem in that is what BC told us is they can't analyze. They can't analyze past 400 years in their models or anything. They can't analyze what will happen there 10,000, 1,000. So it's, so what happens on 400 years in a day? All of a sudden everything's different, the water stops.
Right.
It's the same thing we ran into Tulsa Chief. That thing is gonna be, the water goes into that mine, through the adits, comes out the bottom. That's gonna happen forever. Even if they close up all the adits, you have cracks, so we have all this contact water going through the mine, coming out. Unless you have a massive landslide, the rain stops, something really changes up there, for thousands of years, that water's gonna be moving through the Tulsa Chief and coming out acidic. So right now, BC is talking about in perpetuity water treatment, but you can't define it. In 100 years, where's the bank account for this? In 500 years, where's the people that made these promises? Who's gonna go up there and monitor? In 1,000 years, they'll probably forget about it. So, I mean, that water is gonna continue to move through that mine and others unless, you know, the whole thing dries up. It's been happening that way forever, it's gonna keep doing that up in Tulsa Chief.
Thank you, Derek, and
All right.
I thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight. I believe it feels like I've been on the council forever, but I'm not sure if a council member addressed Haines residents. So, thank you for the opportunity. There's one thing an elder said, one of the most valuable things you can give somebody is their time. And I thank you for the time that you spent here tonight to hear us. There's some things in our language, the Kalini, our languages has a name, and the interpretation of it is water for keen salmon. When we catch the first salmon coming up the river, we have a certain way that we hand our fish in our smokehouse. 2 times we do that. And the first one goes out to the elders. We've been doing that since we've been working on fish. Their smile, their eyes, you can't beat it. One time I was asked in the legislature to put a dollar figure on it. I said that's impossible. And last year, I think, this year, maybe January or something, the answer came to me. I said, from the beginning of time to now, let's pile up all the money from every country. And let's have on this side, like right now, the hooligans are in it, the first pot of boiled fish. When we go share what we've made, all this money in the world does not come close to what we're doing. My wife said it pretty good one time. One of the most things we value the most is copper. And you look at it in your money system, it's a penny. Through the Western culture, Club One is considered probably poverty level or below. But if you talk to me or any other resident from Club One, our tradition, our house posts, everything that we do, everything that we have been doing for centuries, there is no dollar figure to it. One time they tried to put a dollar figure on the courthouse post and the rain screen from the wheel house. They too ran into that obstacle. We can't put a dollar figure on it. Yay, that's good news to us, because we can't put a dollar figure on it. And my better half said about 10 minutes ago, it's time to go home.